I'm building a fog net to capture water from the desert air. My mission is to build a desert forest in far west Texas. We've built this on a minimum amount of water. Between driving to the nearby water well and using the bulldozer to capture floods, every drop of water in the desert is precious. The dream is to run a passive, low-maintenance water harvesting system from the atmosphere in a place where surface water simply does not exist. Any water that I can capture between the rare rain events, it sounds like a dream. And as I build this net, what if we discover that nature has already figured out a better way? The fabric, I was hoping to find 8 by 10, but all I could find was 6 by 12. I'm doing my best between the 2 by 4s that I have, which are a little less than 8 feet long, the T-posts, and using another 2 by 4 as a brace. Like that. The science of fog harvesting is simple, and it works everywhere, even if you don't think you have fog in the San Francisco sense. If you think of a cold glass of iced tea on a hot Texas day, the beads of water that form on the glass, they're not leaks, that's condensation that comes from the air flowing around the iced tea. Fog is just a cloud resting on the ground, and even when I'm in the Chihuahuan Desert looking around, even that air has water in it. This fog net I'm building is essentially a giant vertical tennis net. The difference is the material and the weave. The goal is not to stop the air, it's just to interrupt the water droplets in the air as it flows through the net. When the prevailing winds push air through the mesh, some of the water is literally falling out. Perfect. And when enough water forms, it condenses into drops and gravity takes over. The water drips down. The net itself is the technology, but the strategy is in the location. You can't just throw a net up in any old spot and expect it to work. Some of the things are obvious, like don't put it in the middle of the road, make sure it's not limiting clearance for trailers and vehicles. But the most important thing is elevation and direct exposure to the prevailing winds. I'm building this fog net on my outer windbreak, and it's no coincidence that I'm putting it on the windbreak because that's the first spot where strong prevailing winds are blowing into my camp. Every single rain event except for one comes from the east-northeast, which is what this windbreak is facing, and 90% of our windstorms come from the same direction. It was worth the time and effort for me to put this windbreak up, and in the spring, we're going to add a whole bunch of Afghan pine and some significant trees to really help break up that airflow. But in the meantime, it's going to be 4 or 5 years before we have meaningful windbreak trees. The idea of this fog net is just for the interim, that on the rare occasion where we have moisture-laden, fast winds blowing through, maybe we'll catch some water. One of the most common comments I get on the channel is, have you considered, which is always followed by either planting their favorite tree or asking if I've considered building a fog net. But what nobody ever provides are instructions or directions. If you look online for fog nets, it's not like there's a bazillion results, and the results I do find are geared towards NGOs or they're outside the United States. It's really hard to find a material in the domestic market that is easily available where you just buy a fog net. I did find these instructions, which were super helpful, from a guy in California. It's essentially a part list for going to Home Depot with SKUs and item numbers. He made it really easy. However, sourcing the actual fog net was really difficult. It took me a long time to get out of the mindset of, I'm not really looking for a fog net, I'm looking for this mesh. And with a little help from AI, I realized, oh, it's shade cloth. Fog net, shade cloth, it's almost the same thing. And for the level of effort required to find something that has the word fog net on it versus a shade cloth that costs $20, I opted for shade cloth. I'm renaming it fog net. There are definitely ways to improve this. Airflow is really important on a fog net. That double layer versus the single layer definitely affects performance. You'll see over the coming days why I'm not too concerned about the airflow through that net. I ultimately had to settle for shade cloth. That's 30% shade cloth, which I'm told is the best balance between airflow and surface area. The reason I'm making this episode was the Plasma Channel. He made a 20,000 volt water harvester that works in deserts and sucks water out of the air. He makes it very clear in the episode that it's context dependent. It's designed for coastal fog. I'm not on the coast. I am 500 miles from the nearest large body of water, and I don't get fog either, which makes that solution not ideal. To prove it to you, I'm going to use tech that we all know. This is nothing sophisticated or fancy. I bought something that's completely ridiculous in this context, a dehumidifier. Not a problem that I usually have, but I'm going to run this overnight. We have surplus power in the winter. In the morning, when the humidity is the highest and we have the best possible chance of condensing water, I'll show you what happens. And then we'll take a look at what actually does work out here, and it's a nature-based solution, and it doesn't require any electricity. Okay, it ran overnight. You can see this tiny little drop of water. This is a standard dehumidifier running overnight. That's all of the water it collected. Whether I'm using a fog net or electronics to collect the water, it's just not an effective approach out here. And I will say, current conditions are, it's 63 degrees Fahrenheit and 30% humidity. That's actually pretty close to the average annual temperature. I'm sitting here in my cabin. This is a retired laundry room from the oil fields of West Texas. When I bring infrastructure out here and I spend money, it's a big decision. This is not a donor-led project. I have just a tiny amount of grants. The vast majority of the income comes from doing this YouTube channel, but fundamentally I am doing this on my own, and I have a lot of help with Daniel as a full-time employee. He started as a super volunteer, and then y'all. You guys watching the channel is what makes this happen. Had I built this net properly, meaning that I spent about $500 on materials, metal pipes, making sure that this thing's not going to buckle and move around in the wind, guy wires, the cost to, you know what, before I show you the cost, let's look at how the net has performed over the last couple of weeks in real desert conditions. This will be the first opportunity to check the fog net overnight. Let's go see how it's doing. That is bone dry. Let's check again this morning. It's more humid than it has been at 43%. Nope. Dry as a bone.
There's nothing. It is bone dry. Get up here to the fog net and see what we have. I mean, it's nice and cool this morning, but there's no moisture. That's 5 or 6 days I've checked every morning, and I'm not seeing anything. I'm not getting any moisture. Funny thing is, I'm gonna walk over to the dually and walk over to my pickup truck and show you there's actually moisture in the air this morning. Now if you come over to here, you can see there's moisture. You can even actually see the moisture droplets on the hood of the truck. As you can tell, where it says DUSTUPS right there, the truck was able to capture moisture where the fog net did not. And it's not just this truck. That's the hood of my F-250 and windshield of my F-250. If you look at my pickup truck, you can see moisture just running off of it. You look at the windshield, you can see it. The roof, there's moisture, but it's not going to get captured by a fog net. They don't work in the desert. So I hope that brings the end to the fog net thing. It's not going to work out here.
Most dangers announce themselves, but leaking your private data, that's not something you notice. Your data is leaking out very slowly over websites with data brokers that you don't even know about. You're not going to know it's there until something goes wrong. And that's why I started using Incogni. They track down all of those sites and make sure that your data is removed. Within days of signing up, I saw site by site my data start being removed from the internet step by step. These brokers buy and sell everything. Your name, your address, your relatives. It's all data that other people want. And it's what fuels scams, junk mail, robocalls, all the stuff that you really don't want in your life, and especially identity theft. Incogni steps in and puts it all to an end. It could not be more easy. You create your account, you give Incogni permission to work on your behalf, and then you kick back and let them do all the work. In the unlikely event that you find information that Incogni hasn't handled, you can send it to their custom links removal team and they will take care of it for you. Go to incogni.com/dustups and use the code DUSTUPS to get 60% off the annual plan. It's fast, it's affordable, and it feels good knowing that your data is secure and private. And now, back to the episode. Extrapolating data from my weather station, I can make projections about how many gallons of water I'm likely to accumulate over a 1-year period for a net that is constructed in the most ideal way. And it works out to $5 per gallon. That is a lot of money, considering in town I can buy it for 6 cents a gallon, including the cost of bringing it out here, or from the well, where it's costing me 2 or 3 cents a gallon by pulling it from my neighbor's well. Think about the comparison and how much more expensive it is to pull water out of the atmosphere where there just isn't enough water to begin with. But I did not make this episode to disappoint you. YouTube has an enormous amount of interest in fog nets in deserts, and they have their place, but there is a much, much smarter way to go about it. One of my all-time favorite books is by Nassim Taleb. It's called Anti-Fragile. Think about what that fog net is. Its infrastructure, and especially the material that I used to capture potential dew or fog, is extremely fragile. Any kind of abuse on that system makes it fall apart, and that takes time and money and effort to maintain. However, for that $500, what if I build a desert-adapted anti-fragile system? Meaning that unlike a fog net that requires maintenance and upkeep, what if I establish desert-adapted plants to harvest the water for me? And over time, not only do they harvest water, but they use that water to put out more biomass to harvest even more water more efficiently. I want to show you how we collect water in the desert and, more importantly, how much it costs. The road is so bumpy that even though this is a standard, I don't even bother putting it in gear because we're heading downhill, which is probably a 3 or 5% grade on average the entire way. So with a truck this big, it's easier just to coast. If I put it in gear, there's so much bucking backwards and forwards that it's just miserable. But it's not awful when I've got it just coasting the entire way. And the views here, they're pretty awesome. Pretty darn close. This is my very first time using this trailer, so it's going to be a fumble. Problem solved. So, oh no, don't, oh, okay. Hose is already in there. We're all set. Let's see. We are missing the lid, which, that's not good. Why are the lids missing? All right, here we go. Power. Let's not start with it plugged in. Okay. Why am I getting an error? It hits 1250 and maxes out. This is a 2000 watt generator. Now we're on 60 hertz. Well, I don't know why I would have said 50 earlier. .50 hertz, 0. Well, the pump isn't supposed to pull anywhere near that wattage, so we've seen plenty of shorts on that wire. We're gonna have to replace the well wire. After that short, I got back to camp after dark, and now I'm standing in the middle of the work area. I am preparing hydrogel so that tomorrow I'll be able to dump and make a bunch of soil amendments and get them all nicely mixed in to the planting area. We often get pulled into these high-tech solutions because they seem so cool and innovative, but nature has solved this problem already. The budget for the fog net was a few $100s. What can I do with a few $100s to maximize biomass, i.e. plants, so that they can harvest water from the air? Cacti and grass are the first step. And unlike a high-tech system that eventually breaks and requires maintenance, a grassland accumulates energy over time. Rather than entropic, it is syntropic. Instead of a system of entropy, where it's constantly losing energy, we can develop a system of syntropy, one that gains energy, gains resources, gains water and moisture over time without very much input from humans. I happen to have prepared a spot over by camp where we can build a system exactly like that. Let's see how far we can stretch a couple $100s, make this place a little greener in the process, and gather water from thin air. A key part of the work we're doing to prepare for planting is breaking up, I hate to even call it soil because where we're working, this is all caliche. It's a natural form of cement that is as hard as rock, and it's why it requires a bulldozer with a homemade ripper to tear all of this stuff up. I'd love to upgrade the bulldozer to have an actual ripper, but that's a $7,000 expense. You compare that to my $200 homemade ripper, you can see why I've chosen the Band-Aid. But while we rip, we're also adding a lot of key elements into the soil. We've already added horse manure in this area. It's why the soil has that brown color. And the first thing I'm starting with is hydrogel. Hydrogel is a synthetic product. It holds up to 400 times its weight in water. It's very commonly used in potting soil and in diapers. That's the reason when your kid goes to the bathroom in their diapers and they explode to what seems like a crazy amount of volume, that's the hydrogel working. We are adding this in the surface and then using the bulldozer ripper to mix all that stuff up and break the gel down to a smaller size. That water is completely available to plant roots, and we want to get it buried as deeply as we realistically can to encourage plant roots to get deep. Yeah. Worm castings are a special form of compost. This is literally worm feces. It's a little gross to think about, but it's totally safe to handle. There's nothing pathogenic that's a risk to humans. You can see I'm not using gloves to handle this stuff. It really is clean. And the value in it is it does increase the water holding capacity of the soil a little bit, but it's really about the soil microbiology. There is a lot of good fungi and bacteria and other soil microbes available in the worm castings. I'm spreading that around as a kind of incubator for soil biology. And I don't have too much biochar in this barrel. Biochar starts out as charcoal, exactly like the kind you use in your barbecue, minus the lighter fluid. The reason we add the word bio to the front is that we make our own amendments to it. I bought this for $800 per cubic yard from a provider in Colorado, but that included the shipping cost because the weight of the sacks it's so heavy. And it's crushed ultra, ultra, ultra fine. That's the reason a lot of times when I'm working with it, I wear a respirator. I really should have worn a respirator for this episode, but I cut some corners, so that was not a good decision. In order to charge this stuff, you don't just put charcoal on the ground because it has an electronic charge and it can suck nutrients out of the soil where nutrients are not already abundant in the first place. So we kind of cheat. We speed up that process by pouring nutrients into the charcoal so that it's not going to compete with the soil. We added some fish emulsion, urine, rock phosphate, rice hulls, a couple other key ingredients so that by the time I'm pouring this charcoal out of the barrel, it's not char, it's biochar. The key benefits to biochar are twofold. Number one is soil microbiology. The same kind of microbes that live in the worm castings, we want to get that into the charcoal. Charcoal has a massive surface area, and because the pores are microscopic, it gives the soil microbes a safe little house to live in. And by the way, water is really good at entering those pores as well. Charcoal holds 3 times its weight in water. By mixing horse manure and worm castings and hydrogel and biochar and getting it all nice and deep in the soil, we're providing a microclimate that's as favorable as we can possibly make it to desert plants while still making it appropriate for desert plants. We're transforming this soil into a healthy desert soil. We're not trying to turn this place into Iowa cropland. So this is probably the highest state that we want to bring this soil to for the initial plantings, because our plantings going into the spring and the summer are going to be desert specialists. Mesquite, Palo Verde, jujube, extremely hardy desert pioneers. I'm going to admire my handiwork, and then I'll bring Daniel over here with the bulldozer to mix this all together. Okay, now I really like this drone shot of the planting area. I think you'll notice a huge difference between when we started with manure spread all over the soil before we planted the first seed, the evidence of all of these soil amendments that we've made has mostly disappeared. And although it's kind of sad, I like seeing my work, it's ultimately better because whatever is buried isn't going to get blown away. The seeds in this mix are designed to survive the winter, and if you have any gardening experience, you probably recognize a whole bunch of these plants. None of these are desert specialists. They are drought tolerant, and they have relatively low water usage. Our goal here is just to hold all of these soil amendments and the finer materials in my soil, the silt and the clay, in place so that the wind doesn't pick it up and blow it away. That way, in the spring, when we come plant the real hardy pioneers like mesquite, that there's a good soil with a kick-started microbiology that already has some degree of water in the soil. What you watch me plant is cereal rye. That's just to prevent all the amendments and the work that I've done from blowing away with the wind. It's just holding the ground for the winter. In the spring, we're going to really focus on a desert-adapted system with everything from globe mallow to tepary beans to mesquite. What we're going to establish is a syntropic agroforestry system with lots and lots of native plants, although some exotics, where the core idea is to have a complete three-dimensional use of the landscape. Ground covers, grasses, shrubs, little trees, and big trees. We want all of those things. If you think about a fog net and how much water it captures, it's directly related to the surface area. By building a three-dimensional desert forest, we are maximizing the surface area. That three-dimensional structure has the wind blowing across it and all of the water in that air, and because plants evapotranspirate, the dew point of those surfaces can be lower than would be possible just from the air temperature. And that's what makes it possible for dew to form. In fact, plants like prickly pear cactus and grasses that have substantial surface area in a small space, that's how a lot of the native wildlife out here get their water. Prairie dogs, kangaroo rats, rabbits, the smaller animals go find those little dew droplets and directly drink it. And those are only possible because those plants are adapted to get all of the water out of the air as possible. I realize this isn't exactly an apples to apples comparison. It's more apples to oranges because at least the water that comes off a fog net could be consumed as drinking water. And an agroforestry system, unless I want to sip water off of leaves, it's not really drinking water. But it does grow fruits, and the fruits have juice. And for the cost, I just can't justify spending $500 for what I think will be 10 gallons a year. I could bring out that much water in my pickup truck without thinking about it. For my purpose of building a desert forest, I think fog nets, beyond what I have tested, are just a giant distraction. They don't make any sense at all for my location. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have a place. If you're in a coastal desert where there's fog, i.e. Chile, Namibia, and maybe a few spots, those make sense. But for a guy in the middle of Texas that's 500 miles from the coast with almost no fog, it's not a good idea. If you like creative solutions to water problems in the desert, check out this episode. This hydrogel holds 100 times more water than sand.